I'm Shelton Newsham. I'm the Regional Cybercrime Lead at the Yorkshire Number Regional Cybercrime Unit. I'll quickly introduce our guest, Richard De Vere.
Hello, I'm Richard De Vere, I guess. A social engineer from the Anti-Social Engineer Limited.
Cool. If you don't know who you are, Richard, we're all in trouble. Yeah. And then I'll pass it on to another Richard. This won't get confusing at all for me. At the City of London, he'll just give you a couple of details about the webinar.
Yep, thanks, Shelton. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. If you haven't joined any of the previous sessions or you haven't used Zoom before, you've got a few options to try and get involved in this session as well. So if you have a look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see you have a Q&A box there. So this is your chance maybe to ask Shelton or Richard a question. Just type your question into there and it will pop up on the screen. If you see a question that you like on there and that you'd like it to be answered, you can tick the little thumb sign, give it a thumbs up, and the more votes a question gets, the higher up the list it will go, and the more chance then there is of that question being asked. Also, you can actually answer questions on there yourself if you want to do that, so please feel free. Again, at the bottom, you'll see you have a chat box, a chat function. If you just click onto that chat function now, you should see a whole sidebar open up with some information on our panelists and guests today. Down the bottom there, you can type in some comments and you can either send them to the panelists or panelists and all attendees. My only point there is please remember that this is a policing event. And as you'll see by the top of the screen, we are recording. So remember the rule of the internet, and that if you don't want something on there recorded forever, don't put it on there in the first place. Have a great session, and yeah, thanks a lot, Shelton.
Cool, thanks, Rich. Right, so when we were asked to do this is obviously part of a national rollout of webinars. We want to do something a little different. We always talk about social engineering, and we give out the advice, etc., that many of you will have heard before. But we wanted to give you a perspective of actually somebody who does this for a living. So I guess Richard De Vere. Richard, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I've got some notes written down here. I don't think they'll help me though when like when you hit live. So a little bit about me. I was a lot more interesting when I was younger. I'll tell you that. That's the first fact. Currently, I've gone into quite a middle-agedness. So I'm a director of a small company. I'm a father. I'm a partner. I have a pet rabbit. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but kind of stereotypical normal IT nerd, I guess.
Cool. We've had one question straight away, which is, so before we get into loads of everything, the first question, is Zoom secure?
Is Zoom secure?
Be careful, wouldn't it?
I think that's been debated enough over the past month. Zoom, is anything secure is the question you should be asking. And is Zoom as secure as Teams, or secure as WhatsApp chats? And probably is the answer. But yeah, I guess if you're asking the question on a Zoom webinar, you're attempting to bolt that stable door, aren't you? So yeah, don't worry about it would be my my advice for the next hour. Yeah,
I think for those that are worried about it, obviously there are heightened measures in place, certainly during this. So what types of organisations sort of request your assistance, and is there any common sector, for argument's sake?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. When we started the business 5 years ago, we saw it just to be very large companies. So obviously, your stereotypical multinational kind of companies. They've got an office in Madrid, they've got an office in London, and they got tested. We've seen, due to the increase of social engineering attacks, we've seen more and more businesses getting involved, to the point of smaller businesses, SMEs, kind of performing social engineering tests. So when we look at what kind of business, this now is just a whole range of companies. I suppose the entry requirement is, you need to A, be able to pay for the test, and B, be able to action some of the outcomes of the test, which kind of warrants having a bit of a cyber team, which means then businesses that perform social engineering tests are of a certain like advancement, and they're a certain scale as well. So it all kind of ties together. What I've found is when the companies have money in the bank. Okay, so we've worked for some really unsuspecting companies where you think, why are they getting a social engineering test? And then, like, you know, you speak with the director of the company, and last year they've made £5 million, and that's in the bank. So security has become an afterthought for them, and it's when the money stacks up, there's a big interest in preserving it, really, and making sure they don't send it to the wrong people.
Yeah. Good. And we've sort of had a question that alludes to this as well, but we always talk about the human element and that, but is you know, are there any types of individuals, specifics that you target in an organisation? People who are more susceptible, less susceptible?
Yeah, we'd love to kind of narrow it down, wouldn't we? And we'd love to point the finger that social engineering, it only affects people 50 plus that haven't had much training or grew up with technology, or maybe it's under 25s that are a bit click happy and a bit online with everything. Truth is, once you crunch the stats, once you look at the demographics of people that fall victim to these scams, there's nothing meaningful to come from that. And we've compared kind of areas in the UK. Is London more of a risk than Scotland, etc.? We've looked at qualifications, and we find, you know, very senior people in the industry that are protecting companies on a day-to-day basis. You hit a level, and then your PA starts opening your emails. You know, your like secretary starts getting involved in bookings, and it just goes to show that there's no one demographic of people. And that's kind of why it interests me as well, because the only people that it does really hit home with is the arrogant people that think it wouldn't happen to them. And they can be anyone. They can be new starters. They can be, you know, the boss. They can be anyone in between. So it is really interesting how it does seem to affect everybody. And there's no kind of, you know, like escape from that. So, yeah.
So that's interesting that. I mean, so when you go into an organisation then, how do you determine your plan of action? What you know, what tools and tactics you're going to use, for wanting a normal phrase?
Sure. I guess social engineering, when you look at the heart of it, when you profile a company and you look at what's your pretext going to be, what's the story going to be that you're going to attack the company with in this simulation, inherently we're after people with authority, we're after people with access. Social engineering, to me, it's about taking the access that's been granted to you or to somebody else and making use of that myself. So that means, you know, the janitor for the company might be a good person to have access to the building, maybe a key, but he's not going to have access to the company bank account. And if that was the end game of an attacker, you're going to start to focus more on financial people within the company and people that just inherently have that access. So, you know, stereotypical kind of people that are targeted seem to be finance, you know, kind of finance senior people in the company. Anyone with authority really is the main target for us, and also I cover malicious social engineers. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that one. Okay,
so in terms of determining your plan, what sort of briefs do you receive from whoever's thinking of bringing you in, and what sort of, you know, what scope of information do you get?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head with the word scope, and it is really important to have that conversation. Can you imagine having a rough discussion via email with someone, and you kind of get the idea of social engineering and you book it in, we've got the purchase order, we're making steps to actually go to the job, and then we've got the story wrong maybe we think it's one thing and the client wants another thing. So it's very important to define in writing as well, with a signature and a stamp, that we're doing the right thing. So my right thing might not be what they want really. So it's important to kind of make sure we're on the same track and we get into the same goal. I could think of nothing worse than finishing a 5-day campaign, presenting to the board about how we've took access to email accounts, we've replicated like all these attacks and they kind of look at me and say, well, we didn't want this. We only wanted a quick email test. So that doesn't happen due to that planning stage. So it's really important to get it right. And we've seen in the news last year, there was a couple of pen testers from America who were actually caught in a courthouse. So they're in a courthouse doing a test. They got arrested, and it was claimed that the business they were working for didn't commission that test. They didn't want that test. And they had to fall back then to the legal documents, the signature from the client, saying that's, kind of exactly what they did want and what they paid for. So sometimes, that little bit of paperwork can be everything. When it comes to profiling a company, though, and kind of looking about how we're going to perform the exercise, they're all different. Like what I mean by that is, we're not going to do the same exercise for a multinational gas company than what we're going to do with a chain of florists that are, concerned about something else. So each attack, each simulation is kind of tailored to that company, and more specifically their risks. Even a florist is going to be kind of targeted with invoice frauds, phishing emails, malware, etc. Whereas if you take the other end of the scale, your multinationals, they can go all the way up to kind of terrorism angles. Can people get on site? Can you get in contact with other VIPs? So they have different concerns, and the testing reflects that. So yeah, horses for courses, I think, is the term.
Okay, and so there's no specific patterns or anything of those requests. If something hits the news, for argument's sake, do people jump on, not a bandwagon, but does that alert them to it? Do you see a change?
It can follow. So, 2019, we had in the news a university was breached, and kind of via phishing. So we did get a couple of kind of inquiries following that from universities concerned about phishing breaches. It seems to be that social engineering it used to be quite niche, and it's leaving that niche now, and everyone's becoming aware of phishing emails and scams. So the more kind of awareness around the topic, the more businesses get interested, and they think, is this right for them? Do we have to start looking at phishing and these risks? And it's often yes. I hope that kind of answers it, but feel free to have a follow-up if you need one.
So we've got a couple of questions here, which I'll sort of encompass in one, really. So one's quite straight down the line. So what's turned you from a bad guy into a good guy? For the presumption on that, but more about what experience do you use? Do you look at it, when you're going into it through experience? Is your thought process different, and has that differed with the experience that you've got?
Yeah, I guess, well, I never would class myself as a bad guy, but I grew up on a rough council estate. So I grew up in Huddersfield, and although I wasn't a criminal, life wasn't too good on the estate, as it were. So, I've seen things from both sides. When you look at this, and it is quite common, people almost like to see this bad guy to good guy transition, and sorry to disappoint, but it wasn't like that. The transition was spurred along via kind of enthusiasm for the police. When I grew up, the police were these kind of people, hassled everyone and slowed people down, and almost presented as a problem. It's not until my later years, and I could reflect a little bit, and you can actually see that there's more to this story than the black and white, right and wrong. So everything kind of stemmed from that urge to help the police in a way that I could, and to train in the skills that I desired to reduce crime. That's the number one objective of the business, and it did kind of spur me into become a better person, if that makes sense. I will take a better person. Once you start doing what I do, you have to start questioning ethics of a lot of different angles in life. Becoming vegetarian was one, because I just couldn't justify kind of eating meat. And it does make you question things a little bit more. And I'm seeing another question here from James Linton, notorious email prankster. So really good guy. I just if I can I just jump to that one?
Yeah.
And is it illegal? James asks, like, is it illegal to pretend you're someone else? So James rose to fame on the back of pranking celebrities. So what he'd do is he'd research the celebrities and he'd get involved in a communication with them. Simple answer: it is sometimes illegal to pretend to be someone else, depending on who you're pretending and what kind of remit you're pretending to have, especially if you've got authority. So that's a really easy one to answer for that. If you haven't checked him out, do check him out, James Lynch, the email prankster.
And when you're in sort of when you go into an organisation, sort of on the example that you showed, how many people within there are going to have sort of full visibility of what you're there for, what you're doing, and who you are? You know, we'll move on a bit later to the threats to yourselves, but in an organisation, have you got a single point of contact, or is it more of a committee type thing?
It tends to be. So we normally have a single point of contact, maybe a backup plan B as well, if that person's on holiday, got any scheduled leave. But it tends to be keeping it really minimal to the people that know. And we openly say there's literally no point performing a test if you've shared it with everyone. Yeah. We have had a couple of companies over the 5 years where you kind of rock up and the receptionist is very keen, and everything's very proper, and you just get that feeling that they've been informed. So wasting everyone's time and money there. But yeah, it really does vary between different companies.
Cool. And so give me an idea of the types of requests. So what high risk requests do you get? Do you get any? I mean, obviously I know a little bit about your history, but what sort of high risk requests do you get?
Yeah, so when I started doing social engineering exercises, especially for the company that I used to work with, they had some very interesting clients. That's kind of transitioned as well into our own risks. There's definitely risks involved. This can be kind of interesting to scratch that surface. We've worked at one site where we needed to be informed of a police, like a police presence. Because of the nature of the site, we were informed that the police don't respond normally. So the police respond with armed units and they'll shoot on site. So that was obviously an interesting conversation where you have to very quickly learn about firearms units and how to work with a firearms unit. Spoiler alert, it just comes down to listening very clearly and moving slowly. But yeah, you have to kind of combat the risks and analyse it. It's not always armed response units. Sometimes, I remember from last year's testing, one big risk that we got informed about was a site used chlorine gas to bleach, to clean salad. So the company worked with salad, and chlorine gas come into the risk assessment. Pretty much do not go in this area of the building. And obviously I wanted to go in there. Obviously I was curious why, and because it's full of chlorine gas. So there is risks involved, but it just comes down to listening to the client. The client knows a lot about their own setup, and if there is a risk on site, they've probably gone through the health and safety stuff themselves. So they're more than open to share that with you as well. But it can be quite interesting looking at some of the risks as well. I've nearly been impaled on a fence, which was a long story. But basically leaving a job, I had two options: to go back in, to explain there was a test being conducted and I couldn't get out of the compound, or option two, to climb over a spiked fence, nearly impaling myself. So kind of, when I got to the other side of that fence, I did kind of question health and safety stuff sometimes, and you think, well, I don't think that was reviewed properly. But yeah, it's just about kind of thinking on the fly, and keeping yourself safe is important as well. It is a simulation after all. It's not a real test. Yeah. So risking life, risking health isn't worth it to me. Okay.
So do you, when you sit down with the people that are bringing you in, do you set the scene for them? Do you give them contingencies? How do you decide on what that objective is, and then how far are you willing to go to be successful?
Sure. That again, it's back to the scoping stage prior to a job where you want everyone to have the best from this experience, right? You want our company to be able to perform something that's worth showing. You want the target company to learn from this experience and ideally improve their stance, make adjustments. So yeah, getting that right setting from a very early stage of kind of scoping is really important. Sometimes we have to encourage a company to go a bit further, to have trust in us. If you can imagine a company that's worth millions of pounds and someone from Yorkshire rocks up with a company and we're now talking about grabbing all the passwords from the finance team, there's a lot of trust in that. There's a lot of inherent kind of trust passed to us. So sometimes it's just about making sure that is a safe level of trust. And what we mean by that is if we can report on passwords, if we can explain that we've captured 10 passwords, we don't know them, we've obfuscated what the password is, then that's minimizing, some of that kind of concern. For some clients, we have to tell them to go a bit further, to say, look, you can trust us, we can do more than this. For instance, I had one a couple of years ago where the client just simply wanted us to get on site. And it was quite a big compound with holes in the fence. And you could say, well, we could rock up at 2 a.m. in the morning and just meet that objective. We don't think it's good enough, for you to commission us. So sometimes just with a bit of discussion, you can either turn the job up or kind of turn it down a little bit. It's quite important to do that as well.
How often have you been caught then? How good are you?
About 8 years ago. I never used to get caught, ever. It used to be a case of we used to do everything. We used to hide in the bushes, we used to sneak across. And everything for me revolved around not being caught and proving how good I am, like some kind of Superman. It's not till I realised that you have to sometimes push it further, like in order to get the value from a job. So sometimes I find myself, I'd go to a site, I'd complete one of the objectives, I haven't been caught, brilliant. I'll go back to the car, I'll document the fact I haven't been caught, what I've done, then I'll go back in, I'll try something else. Sometimes I question the fact, do I want to be caught? Because I keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until it's on that kind of level where somebody is going to capture me. And in a way, I kind of want to be caught because it just shows that we've gone as far as needed. There is a bit of a scale, a bit of a hierarchy to what we do. And sometimes if we achieve, kind of some of the low level stuff, I want to step that up and see when is the point I get caught. Sometimes I've been in a building for 2-3 hours at night time, still not been caught, and we've had to leave board because we've been on site for a few hours and we're starting to get a bit tired. But other times as well, we've been questioned the second we've pulled up in a car. So it does vary. There is a couple of notable jobs from last year. I'm going to call him Vince as the guy. Vince was an interesting chap. We targeted a company and they commissioned us to do some work. It was quite late at night, probably about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. And we're going around the compound. We're looking through the windows and we're looking to see, we've been told it's a manned compound. So we're looking around and we see a torch from the side of a building. So we run around the other side of the building and we hide in a gas meter box, like a gas meter room. And we hide in there for quite a while. And we come out and we see the torch again. So we kind of think, well, maybe it's not a torch, maybe it's a light that comes on, or maybe it's something else. And we kind of ruled it out. And we're round a little corner and we're trying to pick a lock to get into the building. And then the guy jumps out from round a corner with his torch and of all the items he had on him, one of the items he had on him was a 3-foot metal bar with a hook on as well. Not just a metal bar with a hook on, which can be really interesting because now we're in a position where we've got to say, this is a commission test. I'm not a criminal trying to break in. Please don't hit me with that bar, which he kind of disputed. As you can imagine, there was a bit of a dispute there. what would a criminal say if they were being caught? Probably something along them lines that, you know, I'm actually supposed to be here, I'm doing a test. It didn't convince him initially. So that's probably the closest we've come to actual physical harm, where he seemed very adamant that the bar was the solution to this. So it's about thinking on your feet, and it's about being able to de-escalate as well. I'm sure you'll be able to, you know, relate to that being a police officer. It's not always about escalating and kind of getting that impact. Sometimes, especially when you've been caught, you do need to quickly de-escalate this. Some situations, if they were left on their own kind of devices to escalate, could end up with unnecessary police involvement, responses, etc., security companies getting involved. So it's quite important to keep it contained and manageable.
There's a couple of interesting questions that you might be able to see. The one at the top, are there any sort of simple techniques that you reuse over and over again because they're effective at a certain stage, maybe in a
yeah, 100%. So basically emails from within the company, and also smishing attacks. Smishing is phishing emails via a text message, basically. These are just tried and tested ways, and I kind of keep telling myself that, oh, we'll stop doing this, we'll move on, but they just keep working. So a very common kind of tactic is to send text messages into the company, and we spoof the number from another, like another person within the company, to see if they respond, to see if people are clicking on links on the back of this, and we find that quite often they do. One of my biggest secrets, I don't mind sharing, is the kind of false flag. So what we've done, which is quite impactful, is sending a very poor phishing email. So we send a phishing email, it has the words malware and virus on the footer, and it has a little fake attachment which does nothing. And we put some hacker text in there, and we send that out to the company. And their IT staff must be scratching their heads thinking, what's this crap? What are we paying for? Until we send the follow-up message, which is from the IT staff. It's very formal, it's very proper, and it's addressing a recent hacking attempt. So you may have been aware there's been a recent hacking attempt. We're asking all staff members to reset the passwords. Now, this second follow-up is where we have some real good impact, because the first one, everyone's scratching their heads. It's not a phishing email. It doesn't work. What's going on? And the second one, they put some logic to it. Oh, well, I've seen the first email, so I'm going to action now the second email, which is warning us and trying to protect us. So being in that kind of situation, we do see that repeated to be very effective. So creating that false flag event and then following it up with something more believable can be really worthwhile.
And again, some of these questions are quite on point for this moment. So what measures can an organisation put in place to sort of mitigate these sort of your first stages of infiltrating or trying to exfiltrate data, etc.?
You've got to look at the mediums of attack, right? You've got to look at how social engineers converse with your company. What mediums are they using? And they're using phones, be it mobile phones, text messages, or just ringing. They're using spoofing techniques. They're using phishing emails, and they're physically attending on site as well. So when you look at each one of these mediums, you can then start to see some easy wins. I'll jump through a few. So one, if your company sends correspondence to staff via text messages, and you use that little sender ID. So I don't know, I'm not sure if the police do, but Shelton might get one and it says police from the sender, police UK. And there's a message in there from the police. And that might be normal. I don't think it is, but most companies are now using the power of SMS to communicate with employees, to warn people, to keep them up to date with stuff. And what we find is, let's say your company is ABC, and you're using the sender ID of ABC to send correspondence to people. Periodically placing a warning in that conversation is quite powerful. So what I mean by this is the company, just like a normal text message, will compose a text message which says, like like, you know, criminals can spoof SMS, never trust an SMS, and always question legitimacy. A very simple warning can go in a text message. Now, if you send that to all of your client base or your staff base, what you'll find is if there's any subsequent follow-up attacks, they'll get placed in that conversation string underneath the warning. So it's sometimes quite savvy to send that warning out every 6 months or kind of periodically, just in case people do clone the company's sender ID. If they use that, then their fraudulent messages are going to go underneath the, like, you know, this warning. When you look at, like, you know, so that's text messages and smishing. When you look at emails, being able to detect a spoof email is number one. Now, many different ways to do this, and I don't want to get into the technology behind this, but implementing some solid protections around spoofing is a real number one. Now, this might be a warning on the top of an email. It comes in, this email is from an external source. Do not trust its content. You know, that's the start. You can go a step further to start to filter what emails are making it in, and you can go a step further as well as blocking and warning. We can actually train people as well to be a bit responsive to what a phishing email is. So you start to see education being used as a kind of like as a stop to that as well. But again, you know, thinking about the mediums that social engineers are going to try and exploit, you can always put in preventions, and these preventions are normally quite simple to, you know, to place in. A policy change. So when someone comes to the building, they have to sign in with a receptionist, and they have a 1+1 policy. So if you've got a guest, you need to be escorted or assigned to a staff member. Now that is an absolute killer when it comes to a job. We rock up, we have a great story, we've compromised emails, we've booked an appointment, we've got a boardroom waiting for us to like you know, to get into. We rock up at reception, and the receptionist says, "Who's your +1?" And we haven't arranged it. And and this +1 also needs to confirm that our appointment is genuine. It's an absolute hands up, you've caught us moment. That's happened a few times where just this very simple policy change that's being enforced as well can really stop us dead in its tracks. So I hope that's the like a few basic tips. But just to zoom out, focus on the mediums of attack. Every invoice fraud is phishing. Every dodgy phone call is phishing. You know, focus on these mediums, and there's very clear documented preventions there. And
what about there's a question here. I mean, it's quite far down the list, Rich, to be fair, but it's an interesting one. What is the type of information, or well, the asset that you are trying to sort of exploit, and do you have any that are just, you know, any contracts or requests that are just a purely physical breach of something?
So when you're looking at just a sole physical breach, you know, if you take terrorism as a good example of this, the concern, it may be kind of like around, you know, different kind of objectives, but the concern basically stems from someone that's not authenticated entering this authenticated space, an area that should be controlled. So, you know, kind of focusing on that can be quite impactful. But there's not really a particular area that we do focus on. So it can change from different clients.
Okay. So, I mean, we always hear stories about people sat in boardrooms, sat on a server in a secure server room and things like that. Do people ask for something just that specific, or is that something where you'll say, you know, the scope of it might be, right, I want you to get as much information as you can about my organisation so I can implement some measures. Would you enter rooms, do all that, or would you look at it and go, right, well, we could have done, but we didn't want to get access to something and potentially view something that's classified and things like that? Because I would presume you'll have an NDA in place, etc., but you would still have knowledge yourself.
Yeah, you've got to kind of manage that really well, and this comes down to helping the client understand what they want. I had a close friend that kind of died, Mike Kemp, God bless his soul. He was a very big advocate for object-orientated penetration testing. So basically working back from that object. If you're holding cash, your object is the cash on a pallet somewhere. If you're holding information, that is the flag. So sometimes it's about getting something from someone. So sometimes it is that simple. If you're holding pallets of money in a warehouse, think security car, etc., then it's very simple to ascertain what's the risk. For other people, it's not that simple, and we can sometimes help them to explain stuff. Like a common one is, if you had access to the office floor, you could do this or this or this. So we focus on getting access to the office floor or a particular area of the building. So that's quite common, but sometimes it's just about talking with the client to what they actually want. So for instance, security car would have pallets of money laying around, but more often than not, we see some companies where it might not be a physical asset. So you might speak with a company and they might say, like, we're concerned about financial loss. So in my head, I think, well, where is the money? And it's not always on pallets. Nowadays, we see it's in bank accounts. So, when we target in a company trying to get a financially motivated, like attack simulation, it's not always kind of going for the money. It might be going for the receptionist, or it might be going for someone in finance. But helping them kind of ascertain what it is that they value tends to be like a big conversation. And like, again, I've said it before, but every company is different. So what I might assume to be the main objective of an attacker, I could be completely wrong, because I've not understood what that business is actually doing, or the ways which money flows from that business. Sometimes we've gone in and we've had our hat on of like a financially motivated attacker. So someone who's after money, they don't care about anything else, so it's just the finances. And how you get to that end goal can sometimes be quite interesting, and it's not always the person with the finance badge on who's in control of everything. So yeah, it can be interesting. You've got to, a bit like for the attacks, you can mitigate the attacks by looking at the mediums of attack. When you look at working with kind of clients, you can kind of you can look more about what they're wanting from that as well, and you can start to focus on the attack as well. So what style of attack are we going to be replicating? Is it a financially motivated attack? Is it a terrorism risk attack? Is it the fact that a competitor just wants to destroy them? So there's all these kinds of reasons why social engineering is conducted. So it's really important to kind of stay on track with it.
So when you're given a specific, maybe like you've just alluded to, a target, an individual thing, do your own ethics come into certain aspects if you're asked to do something? Because obviously a business will be looking at a financial aspect, profit, loss, etc.
Yeah.
But you're looking at an individual. There's obviously your other considerations around that.
100%. You have to factor this in. When I was younger, I was in the Huddersfield Examiner for projecting on famous buildings campaign slogan. It was Save Huddersfield HRI. So that was what I was about. I was a little bit anti-establishment, a little bit out there, and that was my own personal beliefs. Like at the time, when you're working for an oil and gas company, you can imagine there's some questionable ethics, but it's a case of you've got to kind of base these ethics on laws and an understanding of what the client wants. But there's a whole host of conversations there we could have on the ethics of testing. Sometimes we see something and I completely nope out of there. A common one, like a recent one, was the COVID emails. So we'd witnessed people on Twitter debating the ethics of sending a COVID-related email out. And knee-jerk reaction from us was pretty much, we're not going to do COVID emails. We don't want to send out COVID emails. We don't think it's ethical. Potentially we're in that situation where we could tell someone something and it's wrong. So our ethics then were kind of stemmed around the fact that we think this is wrong. Later on, one of our largest clients works in healthcare. So they're a healthcare provider. And we found out that they were being absolutely targeted with COVID-related emails. So it's a sliding scale of things. So we can offer then COVID-related phishing emails for a company that's already being targeted quite heavily with COVID-related schemes. So that's one indication of how kind of ethics has to slide a little bit, depending on what the client needs and that later discussion. So it's not always black and white. You can't always say this is wrong, this is right.
Okay. You might anonymise this, you might not. So there's a question that there's quite a few liked, which is, have you been asked to conduct any sort of mandate invoice frauds in the NHS? This bit will probably definitely be anonymised and things, but what were your outcomes?
Interesting. So we've worked with different NHS-related companies. We've worked with health trusts like primary healthcare groups. We've worked with larger providers up that food chain. And we do simulate very closely invoice frauds, which might be a phishing simulation. It might be seeing how far we can go up that chain. And have we successfully exploited that? Isn't something I would comment on, but we've come in that arena. So later discussions to be had. I definitely wouldn't want to incite anyone to target these kind of chains. If you are financially motivated, I'd probably suggest not the NHS. But there's always a risk to every outcome. So that seemed very, very focused as well on CEO mandate frauds on the NHS. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there for that one. Every business, whether you're NHS or a bank, you're all open to that. If you're paying money and receiving money, you're in that kind of ecosphere of crimes.
And it's quite. Obviously, I know a little bit about what you do, but you alluded to earlier that you're not the only person that does this. How do you keep up to date with the new tech? When you're horizon scanning and you're looking for the new sort of the threats out there and what the criminals are exploiting, which vulnerabilities, simjacking, simswap, you love them, that sort of thing. How do you stay ahead?
You see, I wouldn't say that I do stay ahead. I think that's probably a bit naive to say that you stay ahead. The very best thing we can hope for is to stay on par with the black hats, as you were, the kind of criminals. And all too often, if there is a problem, if there is a common crime that's kind of being committed, we do see, in the news, we do see people talking about it. So yeah, it can be like that. So you've jumped off a different screen, but you're back again, Shelton. You're back.
I jumped off totally, according to I don't know how much of my question you got, in all fairness.
I'll make sure that it's been answered. Go
on. It was just about how you stay ahead of the game. You're not the only person, and what tools do you do?
So I'll just explain, like I just tried to mention then, that kind of staying ahead of the game is probably a bit arrogant. If you're in this industry, if you're in the white hat industry, and you think you're genuinely ahead of the game, then you've probably not understood the game enough. The best thing we can do is listen to the crime, as it were. Listen to the people that are committing these kind of attacks. In a way, they're my mentors, not from kind of taking inspiration from them at all, but they find a way, and they always find a way around preventions. They always find a way around these blocks and these attempts to stop them. So listening to what's happening quite well, and not being so arrogant to think it's black hat versus white hat. We can learn from black hats, and now you don't have to be financially linked with them. You don't have to agree what they're doing. You don't have to even condone it, but we can learn from these different kinds of criminals, basically. Very similar to like a burglar, for instance. If there's a burglar and he's got a new technique of breaking into a house, then of course the police are going to be interested. Of course the police are going to want to know how he's broken into this house or how they've broken into the house. They want to know the techniques, the hows, the whys. So that's the same, like, with our industry. Luckily, we're all kind of sociable. So we do have, conversations with people. And as daft as it sounds, even stuff like social media, Twitter can be a really good way to keep up to date with kind of current attacks. And you can start to see some new things there. It seems to be in the black hat kind of world that once you've done something illegal, you've done something even remotely wrong, you've got to tell everyone about it. I think that's one of the stipulations when you become a member. But you've got to tell the whole world about what you've just found and how good you are, which is very good. If you listen, you can take that as well.
Yeah. And there was a question earlier. How did you get into this? And how could somebody, is this, what is the career of a social engineer? What's it look like?
Wow. Okay. So, right, a rough overview of my early years. First thing I want to preface this with, if anyone's even remotely thinking about becoming a social engineer, do not listen to this kind of hype around how it's for James Bonds with ex-military experience that, are really computer whizzes. Everyone is good at social engineering from being a child. James Linton uses an example of his partner wanting pizza. If she wants pizza, she'll leave the menu out. She'll mention pizza in the day. Later that day, there's a pizza being ordered. Who's being social engineered here? So it's sometimes very simple like that. Apologies, James. But yeah, sometimes you have to look at it in different ways. Is there a bit of a follow-up to that one?
No, people were asking, well, the question was, are there any ethical ways to get into social engineering? Obviously, it's just a career path, but yeah.
So, right, basically, once you've kind of fought through all the bushes of drama and kind of what it is and what it isn't from people that haven't done it as well, normally, very vocal about it, you kind of got to this area. Now, I'll talk about my own experience. Now, I was always a computer nerd. I loved computers. I was suspended once from high school for Pokemon Go games. So that was my kind of knowledge. I didn't work in this industry until a police event, and it's actually the police made me, inspired me in a way. I wanted to help the police. And it was after this event, I knew I'd happily devote my whole life to helping this issue, to reducing cybercrime. I kind of felt it like a purpose. I've never had a purpose, and this was my purpose. Now, I knew that I needed to learn a hell of a lot more about computers. So I was a bit of a tinkerer. I could reinstall Windows, etc. But I knew that wasn't going to cut it. So I knew I needed to self-learn. So I started with a period of self-learning. I was just basically soaking up information about computer hacking from anywhere where I could get it. YouTube. There's a chap called Professor Messer who goes on some of the more basic kind of networky stuff, but just learning and listening all the time, to the point where I thought, I'm going to try my luck at an entry-level job. So I saw the job advert. I went for an interview, and they asked the normal questions. Have you got any experience? No. Have you got any qualifications? Unfortunately not. But my personality was enough to carry me through to a basic entry-level job where I was doing PCI assessment. So PCI is a very small, well, very large section, but it's not very kind of fancy or talked about. But PCI is basically ascertaining whether a company is safe to use credit cards on their websites and on their services, etc. So I was doing this kind of role. I was just happy to be in the industry. I was sat in the corner of the office. I was doing my paperwork, and I had a job. I was happy. And then this company performed social engineering exercises. So it came about that there were one person short, and due to health and safety, 2 people have to go on site to perform a social engineering job. So I got carried along. Now, for me, it was life-changing. For me, it was, to get out of the office, it was like an amazing, kind of escapade. When I was on a corridor, so we'd infiltrated a financial place, and we were trapped on a corridor. So one end of the corridor had a RFID door, and that had closed, and the other end of the corridor also had an RFID door. So we were trapped on this corridor, and it's at this point where I had there's no ways to explain it. I had a 3-foot screwdriver sellotaped to the inside of my shin, and I pulled it out, and I said, I'm going to take off this lock. I'm going to wedge this lock, and we're going to get out this entrance. And it's at that point the people I was with, who were seasoned professionals of this, kind of went, okay, we've not seen that technique before. And it was in the conversation afterwards, like, guys, we're off to rob a bank and you didn't bring any tools. And I couldn't believe how it was being conducted. And I wanted to put my own spin on this. So with the company that I used to work for, they kind of granted me the opportunity to investigate different avenues of social engineering, which I was really kind of happy for. And I got my own style of social engineering from that. So this story is going around to basically to just attempt and to try. So I'm not saying go off and try and break into buildings, see if you're any good. But what I'm saying is just persevere. It's not all exciting. So we get sold this lie of James Bond characters, super knowledgeable, all the gadgets, laser beams, etc. And it's the furthest from the truth I've ever seen. So it's about, for me, things that will help people getting into this industry to do what I do for a job. It revolving around the basics, being able to understand HTML, being able to understand security of servers, being able to understand people as well, and how cybercrime impacts people, but also they're responsible for cybercrime in a weird way. So just listening and just attempting to step forward. You're not going to go from either an entry-level position or an interest in this job to a career where you're getting paid to go out Monday to Friday to actually do this. But that transition period doesn't have to be a degree. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. And you can be useful to a team out there with a year's worth of really concentrated learning. So yeah, it's a bit vague, but I'd say just stick at it and try and keep going. Okay,
I'm mindful that we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I want to just sort of go back to, and I'm going to sort of encompass a couple of different questions that we've got. The reconnaissance you do, and there's a question about freedom of information requests to find out a certain amount of data and some information, but also what platforms are you starting off to build that initial profile?
Google Docs. Google Docs. Yeah, there's a lot of tools. The platform I use personally is literally Google Docs. I create a document, and we create a worksheet where we'll piece in bits of information from a whole host of different sources. So when you're reconning a company, there's just so much information nowadays. You have to really filter what's useful to you, what isn't. And what is useful to me can sometimes be quite benign to companies that don't think about it. A list of names from LinkedIn is absolutely every first step of a job. When we're trying to profile a company is just a building with some doors and windows. Nobody cares about the building. They care about the people in it. So all of these people are on LinkedIn. They're proud to work at the company. They've put a profile up. So something very simple, such as a list of current people that work there in a Google Docs, can be absolutely as impactful and as sophisticated as it has to be. There's also nowadays, fortunately, automated tools which gather information very fast. So again, these can be kind of collated and placed into this as well. So yeah, a whole host of reasons and sources of information. And FOI as well, I am fond of an FOI request. And we've also seen, so we've seen genuine FOI requests that have revealed data about an organisation, but we've also seen as well last year people making kind of fraudulent FOI requests, and the company then responding with all the data they need. So imagine an FOI request to the police and they send back your whole wages slips and everything they've got. It can be quite impactful. So piggybacking on the back of like any genuine mechanism such as an FOI request is useful.
Right. And the last question, because we are down to we're going to have to sort of wrap it up. What's the key bits of advice that you want people that are listening to this to take away?
Yeah. So it's not get wrapped up in the sophistication of it all. Just honestly, like, if you want to stop social engineering, if you want to stop social engineers, it's the absolute basics time and time again. So warning them via a text message, having the 1+1 policy on your reception. These things are often kind of dismissed as, oh no, this won't help us for this situation because this is a sophisticated attack, and it's very rarely the case. So we've sometimes worked with companies that they have the budget, they have this all singing, all dancing protections, but they're just kind of unaware they've skipped over the basics, right?
Yeah.
So it really does matter, and I think after years of this is my biggest takeaway really, is to focus on the little guys, to focus on the basics. When your cleaner says to you the door doesn't close properly, that is a bigger risk as your Caesar informing you of a sophisticated attack or something, and we just tend to just dismiss it. So that's kind of my biggest tip for companies. Concentrate on the basics. Don't get wrapped up in this hype, on this FUD, we call it, fear, uncertainty and doubt. Don't get wrapped up in this. And there's always something you can do, right? Even if you're under attack, there's still something you can do, So.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Richard. I'll just remind everybody this is part of a national rollout of Protect webinars.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass you back to Richard at the City of London, who's just going to go over a couple of details, and then I'll come back to close.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. That was fantastic. As we could tell by the amount of questions that everyone was putting down. Those questions and the chat are going to disappear once this gets closed. If you want to copy and paste those out, then I suggest you do that now before the session does get closed down. As Shelton said, this is part of a national policing series. So I'm just going to show you how to log on to or book your place onto one of the future ones that we've got coming up, which are every Monday and Thursday. So if you just go onto the Eventbrite front page, into the search box, typing National Policing, which will take you through to a whole list of our upcoming events. You can go into any one of these. And what you need to do, if you want to get them all chronologically, scroll down, select the National Policing Protect Network here, and it will take you to a list of all the upcoming ones that we have. So you can see we just had this one here. The next one we have is on Monday. It's about working from home, and we're going to be looking at lessons around organising your homework, looking after your mental health and your physical health as well. So just select that into there, and then you can register your place as you did today. Thanks, Shelton.
Cheers, thank you. Yeah, so for me, again, Richard, thanks a lot. I think certainly from some of the comments I've been seeing, everybody's found that useful. Thank you very much for this.
No worries, and thank you for being one of them police officers that absolutely do everything they can to to kind of stop this kind of stuff. I'm sure if anyone's got any questions, they can relay them through you. And we can
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, that's no problem at all. So yeah, thanks again, and please, those that are still with us, just fill out them feedback forms if you can. You know, it's all about making sure that we can we're adding value and we're not just doing these, you know, without actually helping people. So thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one.